So I have here Surprised by Doubt by Joshua Chatraw and Jack Carson, put out by Brazos Press. Thank you to Brazos for this review copy. This is my honest take on the book. I'll take you through my typical format of my main idea, the research behind it, the readability, the style, and then my general reaction to it. So first of all, I grabbed this book because I heard Joshua Chatraw on an interview and was pretty impressed with the way he articulated and carried himself. And so, and I also had read his previous co-authored book, The Augustine Way, which I quite liked. And so I was intrigued by this one. And I want to say up front, before I even summarize the main idea, I want to say that I have a little bit of a complicated relationship with all these doubt and deconstruction books. I'll say more about that probably in my reaction to that one, but I come into this one with some interest because I was impressed with him and his, like I said, his personality and his way he articulated kind of his project. But I still came in with a little bit of a I don't know about this. What am I gonna think of this? So that was my posture going into the book. But the main idea of this book is pretty well captured by that subtitle, how disillusionment can invite us into a deeper faith. So it's another book about deconstruction, disillusionment, frustration with evangelical teaching and doctrine and culture. And it's a book that endeavors to kind of honestly approach that phenomena right now and think carefully about it and look carefully at maybe why it's happening, and then maybe propose some encouragement for people who are in the middle of doubt or maybe have gone through some doubt, deconstruction, propose some encouragement for them that there are kind of broader ways to look at the Christian tradition than maybe what they've grown up with or maybe what they inherited. And it is an apologetic of sorts. It is a defense, and it is a call to say to those folks, like, there's more here than probably what you were taught. And so you should give it another look. You should consider it. Don't walk away just because of a bad experience that you had or just because of some shallow things that you were taught. That's kind of ultimately the goal of the book, is to defend the broader Christian tradition in the midst of doubt, and to encourage doubters to hang with it. So the research behind it is, this is a very popular level book. It's academically researched and backed up, but it's not, and I'll say more about the style in a second, but there is a lot of research behind it, but it's kind of almost really behind the book. It's not heavily cited. It's not really heavily quotation driven. But all that being said, some of the sources that are informing it are some cultural historical studies. Like they really appreciate Tom Holland as an historian. They really appreciate Charles Taylor as a cultural theorist, which I do too. So that was kind of a plus for me. They demonstrate I think that the co-authors demonstrate a great sensitivity to what's happening in culture and maybe why people are deconstructing so much. And so they cite a lot of kind of cultural examples. They cite interviews people give, podcasts people appear on, YouTube videos even people appear on. They cite that and provide quotations of examples of people who are deconstructing in different ways, and they kind of provide different flavors of deconstruction and what they kind of, how the patterns that kind of play out and certain paths that people take on kind of the deconstruction experience. And they back all that up with kind of real life examples, which I really appreciated that. So there's kind of some kind of cultural landscape looking at what's going on in the popular culture, the zeitgeist a little bit, citations about that. And there's also some more academic stuff, cultural history and whatnot is going on in the scenes there. And they also do pull a little bit on some more popular apologetics stuff when they get into near the end of the book, when they do kind of defend the historic Christian pillars of faith, so to speak. But that's not a huge part of this book. It's more about what's kind of going on in our culture. But yeah, I thought it was solid research. I thought that they pointed to sources where they needed to, and I thought they fairly represented popular kind of deconstruction events that are happening right now in the research. So the readability of it this is a smooth, easy read. It's quite short. It's very short chapters, very accessibly written. I think it seems very clearly, and I think Brazos does this pretty well. Very frequently, they have short books that are approachable, and I think they're designed to be that way and probably edited and pointed that direction. So this is super easy to read. I could imagine giving this to pretty much anybody, if you're a reader or not, or if you're not interested in the academic stuff that's going on behind the scenes, it doesn't really matter. This is super inviting, intentionally, seems to be intentionally written to be approachable, which I quite appreciated. And I just found it a very, very easy reading experience. Super, super highly readable. If you are a reader, you get through this really quickly. Okay, my reaction to this book is positive. I liked it. I appreciated it. I want to say a few specific things that I appreciated about it. First of all, one of the driving analogies they use, I really liked. They use this analogy of the house, the Christian house, meaning like the broad Christian tradition and teaching and orthodoxy over the millennia now, centuries. That's the Christian house, and then they use this analogy. So I like that analogy in general, but they're not the ones to come up with this. They have kind of a distinct twist on the analogy that I haven't seen before that I like, and they talk about the attic of the house, and they talk about the attic of the house being kind of this fundamentalistic, certainty-driven, kind of current, late modernist evangelical thing. That's the attic. So they talk about, and this really stuck with me, and I found it really helpful. They talk about how a lot of people. In our context, I'm speaking from America in 2024, a lot of people in our context kind of were raised in the attic of a house and they didn't realize that there was a whole house beneath them. And I really like that image. I found it very resonant and helpful, and I think it gets at some of the experience of being raised in that setting. And they even press the analogy to talk about, like, if you're raised in an attic, you're going to have a hunch because your posture is going to be bad because you're going to be kind of formed by that, like, cramped space of that attic. I think that the analogy works really well when you think about discovering there's a whole house beneath you, and what that experience can be like. They even talk about, like, the desire to jump out the window of the attic. I mean, I think they just really run with that analogy in a way that is a great through line for the book. It's very arresting. It's very memorable. It's actually very helpful. I really like that. It's kind of the other side of the coin to the analogy. If you listen to Tim Whitaker on the New Evangelicals podcast, he talks about the evangelical basement. It's kind of the similar idea, just flipped around to kind of different image. But for some reason, I really like the attic imagery. I like the idea of, like, this especially the notion of, like, the tendency to want to retreat into the attic to kind of keep yourself safe from the world. You almost kind of go up into this small space to try to hide. I just think that captures something about the evangelical experience that a lot of people have, especially people who are approaching doubt and deconstruction and disillusionment. So that's probably my favorite thing of the book. I think it's one of the most distinct things this book contributes to the whole conversation that's happening. A couple of the things I liked about it really quickly are, I really think they do a great job capturing the different strands of doubt and deconstruction. They talk about kind of optimistic skepticism. They talk about the appeal that a lot of people have to more of this mythic approach, the, like, Carl Jung, which is in some ways people like Jordan Peterson have really pushed on that. They talk about the allure of that in our countercultural moment, and a few others. But I just think they do, from what I've seen and kind of my experience in talking to people. I'm a pastor and have seen people go through these journeys. I've been on somewhat of that journey in the past myself. I just think they do a really compassionate, sympathetic, and fair job of articulating what that looks like, why people might be attracted to certain paths, why people might have this strong desire to just get out of that attic. And I think that the attic analogy, and then I think that section of the book where they walk through what's going on and why people are attracted to these paths, I just think that's probably the strongest part of the book, and probably the thing the book contributes the most to this whole thing that's going on in our culture today. So I liked all of that. And I could see, I think this is important, I could see giving this book to somebody who is kind of on the process of getting out of that attic. And I think that most people who are in that experience would probably find this book to be helpful to them, and I don't think they would find it to be combative or condescending or frustrating or anything like that. And I think that's a really important tone. I don't think that tone is always struck in conversations about doubt and deconstruction, particularly from an apologetic defense kind of viewpoint. Just a couple other things I want to say about this book as I wrap up this review. I think by way of some critique a little bit, is there is a turn in the book about 3/4 of the way through. They have a section where they talk about kind of the load-bearing walls of the house and the foundations of the house, and they talk about kind of the core pieces of the house of Christianity. And for some reason, that particular section left me a little cold. it turns into, in those couple chapters, a little bit of a kind of a well-trod defense of a lot of the same talking points I've already heard from a lot of conservative apologists. And again, I don't want to overstate this. It's not bad, and it didn't turn me off utterly. I just found it to be, I found the other stuff in the book so engaging and like kind of helpful and compassionate and relatable when they're talking about what's going on in our culture and that attic analogy and having compassion for people who want to get out of the attic. I thought all that stuff was like so good, and I was really, really immersed in that. And then they do turn to this defense of kind of classic ideas of Christianity, and I just found it to be a little bit of, honestly, some of the same old. That's there. No, it's not a very long section. It's just a couple chapters. But if you're reading it and you have kind of my experience and similar experience to me, similar stories as me, similar reading habits as me, you probably would have the same experience when you get to that section. A little bit. I kind of was like, okay, sure, yeah, this is a reasonable, competent defense of the resurrection of Christ or whatever. But just the rest of the book is new and fresh and helpful and distinct, and that was not. So that's a little bit of a wrinkle. Also, one other thing I want to say about it is, I love the attic analogy and I like the broader analogy of the house. I think there's a lot more that could be done, and maybe this isn't the book to do it because it's a very short book and it skews more towards kind of, I think, sympathy and compassion for doubters. But man, I think as I was reading and as I was thinking about the house and the idea of load-bearing walls and a foundation and rooms, and I was thinking there's so many more, because in my own faith journey, realizing there were so many rooms, like the wing of Eastern Orthodoxy, for example, or the foundational writings of the patristics, who talk about stuff in such utterly different ways than I was taught. There's just so much out there that house analogy can really be pressed far, and I think that you could do some really exciting stuff with it to usher people who were raised in that attic, to usher people into these really life-giving rooms and other parts of the house that still are well within solid Christian Orthodox teaching. And this book doesn't really do that, and I think that's why that one section left me a little bit cold, is because it kind of took some very, very oft-repeated, well-trod apologetic defenses of just a couple points, like, again, the resurrection of Christ, for example. Again, I think I'm just offering that if you're a prospective reader, you've gone through a doubt deconstruction journey, you're in one. I don't know wherever you're at. I'm just offering these thoughts as a way to kind of prepare you for what this book might be. I think the book is at its strongest when it's describing what's going on in our culture, giving you that attic analogy, empathizing with people who were raised in the attic, giving them permission to explore, giving them permission to get out of the attic and into the house. I don't think it does as good of a job at fleshing out that whole house, per se. But I think it does an excellent job of the other stuff. And so that's, I guess, what I really want to, if I want to summarize this review, my takeaway, that's kind of what my takeaway is. And so that, depending on where you're at and what you're looking for, or if you know someone who might need that permission, who might need like a thoughtful Christian voice to give them permission to get out of the attic, or to even just articulate what the attic experience is like, this book does a lot of good there. And they do end, I do appreciate the ending. So they defend kind of the pillars of the house, the load-bearing walls, and then at the end, they do give permission to practice Christianity even in the midst of doubt. And I really like that. I think that's really helpful. Kind of invitation to community, invitation even to prayer, invitation to well-established Christian spiritual formation practices that you can practice even if you aren't sure what you believe right now in this moment. That's a great ending to the book, and I really appreciate that that's the direction that they took at the end. So yeah, that's my journey through this book. A lot of good, some critique, and then I appreciate the ending. But in general, I would say, I don't know how many more of these books I'm going to read. I've read a good number of them, and I don't know how many more of them I'm going to read myself. I think this one is about one of the better ones, especially if you want something that's relatable to where most people are at. I'm not sure how much new can be brought into the conversation, to be honest, but I did appreciate the voices here. I'm glad this book exists. I am actually thinking about giving this book to some people because of all those things that I just articulated, and I think that potentially could be you. If you're watching this, you might be someone who resonates with this project. So those are my thoughts on Surprised by Doubt from Brazos Press, Joshua Chatraw, and Jack Carson. As always, thanks for taking some time to watch.